All right, well, good morning or good afternoon or maybe good evening, depending on when you're watching this. I'm going to continue on with chapter four here. This chapter is titled Ecosystems. We're looking at how basically energy and matter flow from organism to another organism or from one part of an ecosystem to another. And so today's learning objectives is talk about energy flow through the ecosystem, focusing in on food chains and food webs, and then talk about ecological pyramids. And there's a couple different types of pyramids that help us analyze how energy flows through each trophic level. And that's going to be a new vocab term here, trophic level. So food chains and food webs, basically energy when it flows, it's kind of this one-way stream, and it starts with our primary producers. So in our previous lecture, we talked about two types of primary producers, those that are photosynthetic and those that are chemosynthetic. And photosynthetic means they use light as their energy source to make sugars, and chemosynthetic means they use inorganic molecules and to make their sugars, but they also make a couple different byproducts, if you will. Another word, remember, for producers are autotrophs. But anyways, food chains is just like a short little story, a series of organisms in which energy is transferred from one organism to another. So here's a simple food chain where we have our flour that makes sugars, and that energy is being transferred from the flower to the caterpillar. So notice that they're using the arrow and it's pointing away from the flower. So energy is being transferred from the flower to the caterpillar to the frog to the snake, and then the snake to the owl. So this is a simple food chain. You can see it's a one-way stream. Here's some others, and I like this graph right here because it shows the trophic levels off to the side here. We're starting with our primary producer. Maybe it's a grass, to our primary consumer, the first organism that consumes the producer. So that's the grasshopper. Secondary consumer that consumes the primary consumer, in this case a rat, and then to a snake and to a hawk. Here they're looking at a pond biome. Here's an ocean biome. But the arrow is still pointing similarly in this food chain diagram. Each step right here is called a trophic level. So the flower is a trophic level. The caterpillar would be a primary consumer. That's a trophic level. The frog is a secondary consumer. That's a trophic level. Here's another trophic level. Here's another trophic level. So it looks like I got a short little video here. And it's probably not... Oh, yes, it will work because I changed my settings to have my links open up in Chrome. Go me, figuring out technology. Oh, you know what?
Within an ecosystem, organisms can be categorized into two groups.
That's an old link, and the reason for that is in the old curriculum. I take my old stuff and I copy and paste what's useful, and this picture was useful, but then in the old curriculum they were talking about generalists and specialists, and generalists are animals that eat basically anything, and specialists means that they only consume like one or two things. So never mind, we're just going to move on. My bad. Anyways, more on trophic levels. So energy flows up the food chain from the lowest level, in this case the producer, to the highest level, and producers are always the first or maybe on the bottom. Okay, so it usually goes producer to an herbivore, maybe an omnivore, and then a carnivore consumer of some sort. Now, food webs are a little bit more complex. It's a network of feed-in interactions, and it shows energy as well as maybe matter, dependent on the food web. But it's like a bunch of food chains linked together. So in the previous slide, this is just a simple food chain. Okay, but with the food web, we're going to have multiple food chains within that food web. And, we're going to include like decomposers or detritivores. So the food webs are a little bit more complex, and the effects of the disturbance or maybe the environmental change is kind of hard to predict. Like what would happen if you were to take an organism out of the food web? How would it affect all the other organisms? You could, hypothesize, but food webs, like I said, are very complex, and so it's kind of hard to predict what might happen. So remember, decomposers are organisms that break down things. So your book provides this weird example when we kind of have like this Lego house here, and it's going through this decomposer shredder and breaks it up into tiny little pieces. And then we have a primary consumer that will recycle those nutrients or those bits of pieces or Lego pieces in this case and reassemble it to be used again. So matter matter is being recycled here. So the stability of any food web or any food chain is producers. Like I said, producers yesterday, super vital for life. So let's just talk a little bit about the legend here before we look at the animals. So scavengers are this light green, and it looks like we only have one here, that's the vulture. And we have our decomposers as yellow, and I'm only seeing this down here. We have our detritivore. These guys are halvesies, so you can see that they can play multiple roles here. Omnivore, here, there's the raccoon. Carnivore, the blues, kind of up in this area. Herbivores down here, and then our primary producers. It looks like we got two of them here. Okay, so there's two types of arrows, two consumed after death, and then the detritus pathway. But let's just start with our primary producer. Okay, primary producers, they can die and be decomposed. Okay, and then bits and pieces can be used by other organisms. But let's just say they don't die on their own. Let's say they were consumed by, this flagfish, and the flagfish was consumed by a largemouth bass, and then by a anhiga, and the anhiga dies, and the vulture eats it. But here's one food chain. But I could start over here and do another food chain. Plants and leaves, seeds and fruits. Maybe a deer to a bobcat to a vulture. Or, a fruit to the raccoon, and the raccoon gets eaten by an alligator. I don't know where the heck we are at, but whatever. And then a vulture. But anyways, you can see that there are multiple food chains found within this food web. So you're just going to follow the arrows. Okay, moving on to pyramids. So ecological pyramids are models, and they can show energy or matter as well as numbers. I'm going to show you different types of pyramids here within each trophic level in a food chain or food web. So remember, trophic levels are producers and primary consumers and so on and so forth. So one type of pyramid is a pyramid of energy that shows the available amount of energy at each trophic level or food chain. So remember, plants, they produce a lot of energy. But when you consume plants, only a small amount of that energy that's created by the plant is actually transferred to you. And your book says 10%. That's not necessarily true, but every biology book under the moon talks about this 10% energy transfer. So I do have a slide that kind of talks a little bit about that. But anyway, so only a small portion is available or transferred, and the rest of that energy that was created is either lost as body heat or a waste product, right? So here's me. Let's say that I am going to have a delicious, nutritious lunch of spinach leaves, right? And let's just say that there's 1,000 joules of spinach leaves. Now, to give you an idea of what a joule is, it would be like taking an apple and lifting it from your waist to your mouth. Okay? Like, kind of like lifting a barbell. To do that just once, we go from your waist to your mouth, takes 1 joule of energy. Okay, so a joule is a very, very small amount. So I'm just making these numbers up, and I'm making them easy for simplicity's sake. So let's just say that I have a bed of spinach leaves that are worth 1,000 joules, and I consume them. Now remember, only 10% is being transferred. So it had 1,000 joules of energy, but I'm only able to get 100 joules. Okay, only 10% gets transferred to me, and the rest is lost as body heat or waste. Okay, here's me in my prime form in track in high school. Now, I have 100 joules of energy from spinach leaves, right? Let's say that I'm out on a run and a bobcat or a cougar takes me down. Okay, how much energy is that cougar going to get with this 10% transfer? Okay, seriously, I had it here. Well, it would be 10%. Okay, 10% of 100. So we move the 0 or get rid of a 0. So this cougar's only going to get 10 joules of energy from me, right? So you can see that with each trophic level, it decreases. Okay, only 10% is being transferred. So we started at 100 to 10 to 1 to 0.1. Okay, two other pyramids, I should say. Pyramids of biomass and pyramids of numbers. Now, biomass means that if you were able to weigh the organic matter of each trophic level in an ecosystem, that would be your biomass. the total amount of living tissue within a given trophic level. So I think on the next slide I have my biomass examples. But when I was in college, I did a study on earthworms, and I was looking at the earthworm density between riverian ecosystems, which are basically ecosystems right by the river, and then prairie, and then agricultural, and then residential. So I would make up this mustard solution that would irritate the earthworm skin so they would actually come to the surface. So I'd pour this mixture on a grid, a 1 meter grid, and I'd wait for the earthworms to come up, and then I would take them, and then I actually had to bake them. Because you can't just count how many earthworms, because each earthworm is different, and they are also very stretchy and whatnot. So, and I couldn't weigh them when they were wet, so I actually had to dehydrate them, which was really sad. And then I weighed their biomass, and so I was comparing the biomass of earthworms between each of these different ecosystems. So that's one way that scientists tend to use biomass in the study of ecology. Pyramid of numbers shows the relative numbers of each organism. And so your producers are obviously usually more numerous than all the other trophic levels. So grassland in the summer, yeah, there better be a bunch of little grass strands out there, right? And then as you move up, the numbers tend to get smaller. Okay, not always, but they tend to. Here's a biomass pyramid looking at kilograms per kilometer squared, okay? And some more biomass. But anyways, that's it for section 4.2, explaining how energy flows through the ecosystem, talking about 3 different types of pyramids and how energy flows through each of those trophic systems. But anyway, yeah. So tomorrow's lecture is going to be about cycles of matter, and that's the section I'm actually going to break up into 2 parts, because there are 4 biogeochemical cycles, and your book is very, very in-depth and detailed about each of those cycles. So I just want to make sure I elaborate on it. I know the notes don't say much on it because I'm just like, oh, gosh, it's really nitty-gritty, but I'll just talk about them in depth. So thanks for tuning in, and until next time.